Hi, folks. Hello, hello. It's lovely to see you all. Welcome to Codebase here in Edinburgh, and hello to those who are joining us online. For those who haven't met me, I'm Barry McDonald. I'm VP of Community here at Codebase. I'm going to introduce the panel and Casey, who will be hosting the event. Just a couple of quick bits of housekeeping before we start. The toilets are directly behind you. There are no planned fire alarms this morning, so if the fire alarm does go off, it's genuine. Please walk calmly outside across the road. We also have a code of conduct here at Codebase for all of our events. By signing up to Eventbrite, you've already ticked that box. In a nutshell, it's just be nice to each other, allow everyone the chance to ask some questions. That's kind of it. So what's going to happen this morning is we are going to have a little panel discussion for approximately about half an hour. And then afterwards, there's a chance for you guys in the room and you guys at home to ask some questions of the panel. It's all really casual, nice and relaxed. Those who are joining online, my colleague Anise is looking after you, so please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A or chat function. And so yeah, that's it from me. If you have any issues at all, please talk to any one of my colleagues. They are all loitering at the back, suspiciously wearing Codebase lanyards. I am not wearing a Codebase lanyard because I think that makes you a moving target. So but anyway, so without further ado, I will hand over to your host for this morning, Casey Liao.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, TechScaler. Thank you, Codebase, for having us. How many people here are actually from Scotland? Okay. How many people are not from Scotland that are here? Okay. Wow. Interesting. Okay. Good to know. Okay. So before we begin, let's just do a quick round of intros. We have a lot to talk about. So let's start with this side. Monique, who are you?
I'm Monique Woodard. I'm based in San Francisco, and I run a venture fund called Cake Ventures, focusing on early stage seed and pre-seed investments into companies that touch areas of demographic change, like aging and longevity, the increased spending power of women, Gen Z, things like that. Before I started Cake, I was a founder twice, started a community of founders, moved into venture at 500 startups, scouted at Lightspeed, did a bunch of venture stuff, and then started my own fund.
Oh yeah, and what tech are you most excited about right now?
What tech? I am really excited about the future of non-office work. So the future of jobs that are like healthcare jobs, construction jobs, things like that. I think that area has had a lot less innovation and technology focused on it over the years. And I think now is the time for us to focus on like these sort of blue collar and pink collar jobs.
Great.
Hi, I'm Andy Robinson. I am an entrepreneur. I'm the founder of a company called Earth Hub, which is a early stage pre-seed startup focused on Earth observation data. I also founded a company called I Am Here, which is a restaurant tech business. That's raised angel money. I previously was involved in a company called Cultivate here in Codebase. We built software for all kinds of different companies. In 2019, we sold that company to Deliveroo. And I led the Scottish office for Deliveroo here in Edinburgh. I'm also a mentor for TechScaler here. So I probably worked with about 200 companies here. Yeah.
And what tech are you most excited about?
At the moment, I think probably application of AI for like therapy and relationships.
Okay.
I've been thinking a lot about that recently.
Okay. Is this mic supposed to have a audio? Yeah, it's just like, I know it's for the online, but I'm not sure if it's supposed to be, is it supposed to have a thing? Can you hear everybody? What these guys saying? Okay. All right. Who are you?
All right, there you go. My name's Chris Neumann. I'm a partner at a fund called Panache Ventures, which is a $100 million pre-seed fund based in Canada. Prior to that, I was an entrepreneur in the enterprise data space, had a couple of VC-backed companies in SF, all around big data, business intelligence, things of that nature. I also run a San Francisco-based accelerator called Panache Academy, formerly known as Commonwealth Ventures. If any of you guys have been on the Barclays Global Connect program, we run that. And the next one's coming up in November. Applications are open next week.
And what tech are you most excited about?
So as a data AI guy, I love data and AI. I'm actually really interested in combining what these two just said, which is the applications of data and AI to non-traditional work and things like manufacturing and things that are not necessarily AI for programmers.
Manufacturing is non-traditional.
Yes,
Okay.
tech people.
Fair enough. Hey, everyone. I'm Mike Sigal. I am a new resident of Lisbon after 35 years in Silicon Valley to try and bring my 35 years of junk in my head to the European ecosystem and help it evolve. I did 7 startups. I've been a VC. I've been a corporate consultant. And now I spend most of my time as an advisor and coach to both founders and emerging fund managers. And to hit your question, as someone who's done over 100 fintech investments, I'm sort of most excited about how fintech is now going to attack capital markets, including venture, including IPOs, just basically changing the way that part of the industry, the financial services industry, works.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Marvin. So I spent about almost 24 years in San Francisco now, but originally from Vancouver, like many of the folks here. In my career, I've done a bunch of different things. I've done startups for a couple of years. My first company I was very, very early. A company that raised about $63 million before it imploded. I was a big tech executive for Yahoo. So I ran a lot of international expansion. So I was there for about 10 and a half years. I was a partner of 500 startups for about 6 years. So I started San Francisco office and did about 400 plus investments over there. Ran a gaming holding company based between Germany and Ukraine for about 2 years. And now I mainly invest. I invest through my small VC fund called Diaspora that focuses on European pre-seed founders coming specifically to the US, and also a holding company where I invest, do LP checks as well as seed to Series A investments. And so I've done about 465 investments over the last like 10 and a half years in pre-seed, seed, and A. And I also sit on several investment committees of different VC funds around the world. And yeah, that's pretty much me. And
great.
Space, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of defense tech stuff now, defense tech and frontier tech, but my bread and butter is SaaS enterprise software developer tools.
Okay, great. And if you've been to Web Summit, I'm the co-host of Web Summit in Lisbon in November. We do shows around the world. There's also one in Hong Kong, Canada, Middle East, and Latin America. So I do a lot of community things. I'm based in Hong Kong. I'm very excited about Web3 as Asia is really embracing the Web3 thing. I just got invited to a blockchain event here tomorrow night. So that's amazing. So Scotland's involved as well. This is an event about VC. We have these amazing VCs, so I'll definitely let everybody ask questions, and we'll be here after the event. But I just want to get these guys to kind of cover a little bit of color, a little bit of what's happening right now. 2023, markets are down. I heard that normal size check into pre-seed or seed companies, 25K. What are you seeing right now in your area in terms of investments? How much money is going in, and what industries or verticals are getting most visibility right now? There'll be the same question for everybody.
I mean, there's been a downturn, obviously, sort of because there's later stage stuff is in massive decline that has ramifications in regards to early stage, but pre-seed and seed deals are still getting done in general. It's still been pretty active. I think valuations have come down. I can only say about like SF and most of Europe in general where I'm active. Deals are still getting done, but the reality is that they're taking longer. So stuff that used to be like 4 weeks is now taking like 8 weeks. Valuations have come down between 30 to 50%, depending on sort of like the stage. That actually is not happening in like the garbage called generative AI. I'm actually quite bullish in general about generative AI. Yeah, it is. It's total garbage, right? Like just most of it's like everyone's just putting AI in there.
Yeah.
It's like, we're AI for this, which is like, oh, it makes no sense. Yeah. But in general, it's still very active. B2B software is still doing really, really well. Developer tools are still doing very, very well. And so still pretty active there. Defense tech is actually booming now. So I'm in a bunch of it really.
Just briefly, what is defense tech? What are you looking at exactly? Rocket guidance missile systems?
Yeah. Basically. So we're basically going up against like the Raytheons and Lockheed Martins of the world, what we call the primes. And so Reese invested in a autonomous. Actually, I'm not really allowed to talk about it, but
there is a sniper in the back I saw. Yeah. Okay. Mike, how about same question, but maybe from fintech? How are the fintech deals going now?
They're going okay. Fintech took a giant hit when the markets turned down, and they also bounced back a little bit better than others. I think one of the important things to know, I've been to a bunch of investor conferences in the last 6 months, and the word crypto is toxic and will probably remain that way until there are strong regulations in place. I think the highlight for crypto is when, BlackRock and the other big industrial financial services players bring real products to market. And their lobbying money is part and parcel to doing that. That's probably the general theme.
All right. So I operate in Canada now, which has a lot of parallels to the UK ecosystem. I would say similar to what Marvin said, investments at the pre-seed and seed are still happening, and they're still happening fairly in earnest. We definitely saw a pullback kind of Q4, Q1 of this year, where a lot of founders were just kind of going, what's going on? I don't know if this is a good time to raise. But the spring was super active, particularly in Vancouver and Toronto. Pause for summer vacation. Founders are gearing up, and kind of this week, this past week was back to school in SF. This coming week is back to school across Canada. So we expect it to be a pretty busy market. I would say what we're seeing on the other end is the companies in our portfolio have broadly paused raising for Series A, Series B. I think we're all still kind of waiting to see the signals of when is that going to unlock? Is that going to come out, kind of coming into the fall? I think today or tomorrow is YC demo day. And so I think that's going to be a pretty big signal in terms of what happens with valuations and some of the activity coming out as well.
Interesting.
I guess I'll try and give a perspective from the tech scaler mentoring side of things. So I think seeing across the companies that I've been working with, I think there's definitely a concern that it's harder to raise money, but in some ways I think that's a good thing because it means that you have to focus more effectively, and B, I think there's less fluff. I was involved with I was on the advisory board of a crypto startup a few years ago that raised 3 million with an idea and absolutely no understanding of a problem that it was solving, which I thought, I'm going to get involved with that. That sounds quite interesting. It's going to be a disaster. And it was. So, I think there's what is happening like across the market where it's definitely harder. But then I think within each individual business, if you have a serious opportunity then and you can demonstrate a plan towards that, then that's ultimately a good thing for a business, particularly at an early stage.
I'm a generalist investor with a thesis. So I think that, generally speaking, the categories that I invest in have been really strong, especially in digital health and the healthcare deals that I've done. I will say that the bar for raising a successful round, whether it's pre-seed or seed or Series A, has moved. You just have to have better metrics, more proof points, just be a better company than I think you had to be in the last couple of years.
What do you mean by that? Because the money was easier to get before, so it's not, you don't have to be so special.
And I think investors were investing in a lot of not great companies. And, a lot of that was driven by FOMO and by other investors FOMOing into deals that they probably shouldn't have. Yeah. And now people have certainly pulled back. We're being a little bit more conservative. And I think that's what founders are experiencing when they're going out to market for deals right now. Now, if you are an AI company, you've got all the FOMO in the world to ride on.
Yeah, right.
Which is not great.
Yeah, exactly. What size checks are you writing these days this year?
250 to $500,000.
Okay.
Same size as always.
Okay. All right. So let's go back, starting with you. What regions besides, are you focused mostly in Bay Area and US, or do you see anything happening around the world in different regions that are attractive to you that you're reading about? You hear deals are happening, things maybe you want to get involved in. Could be here, could be Middle East, Europe, whatever.
Most of my deals have been US and Canada.
Okay.
So generally speaking, North America focused for Fund 1. For Fund 2, 3, 4, I think the viewpoint will expand because the things that I invest in are global changes, right? Mm-hmm. You see global changes around our aging population. Every country is experiencing this aging. So I think in future funds, it will be a little bit more global, but for right now, I'm mostly North America.
Okay. Andy?
I think, again, to try and give a bit of perspective from Edinburgh, been working on this early stage product here in this building, actually, with my co-founder Martin, and we went out to the US to talk to potential customers and to test our idea. And I think just being over there and having that different perspective from being, you know, particularly having gone through COVID and everything else, you get a bit isolated sometimes. And I think going over to the US was a huge eye opener for us to just like, there's a lot going on in this industry. It was super exciting. And I think I would just encourage people in this room or watching at home, if you're sitting in your bedroom building a startup, which a lot of the time you are, it's pretty helpful to just go completely out of your comfort zone and go somewhere like that and see just the scale of what was going on. Because for me, that was super exciting. And I came back really energized. So
Where did you go?
we went to the biggest space tech conference in the world.
Where's that?
It was in Colorado.
Colorado.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
Interesting.
It was like 10,000 people, every one of these big companies, massive defense focus,
Okay.
obviously.
Cool.
Yeah.
Marvin can't talk about it. It was shot.
We can edit that bit out.
Okay, well, Chris, you probably have something similar. The Canadians also don't like to leave their country. But if you are investing in Canada right now, that's your focus. But where else are you seeing hotspots that maybe you're like, oh, I wish I could do a deal over there because it's like hot.
Yeah, definitely. I think the point you just made is a really important one, which is a lot of founders around the world have developed misconceptions from what they read on the internet and what they see and what TechCrunch told them and whatnot. And I think regardless of where you are, one of the most powerful things for founders is to go to the center of competition for their industry, right?
Mm.
And for most people in tech, that is the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And what I've found is whether it's Canadian founders or founders from any country in the world, the ones who intentionally go to Silicon Valley, spend a month or 2 or 3 months there to really get a sense of, you know, for lack of a better term, what is my competition? If you're going after a global industry, what are they doing? What pace are they operating at? It up-levels them in a way that you can't possibly do if you just stay at home and kind of get all of your sources of inspiration from the internet. So I think that's just broadly really, really, really important. When I talk to Scottish founders, it's even simpler, which is get on a train and go to London, please. You've got one of the finance centers of the world a few hours from here, and yet, you know, many founders don't do that.
Interesting.
And so that trend of just getting somewhere, going somewhere else, getting inspiration can change the trajectory of your company, but also yourself as an individual.
What globally competitive looks like is really an important thing.
It's a good segue for you because you left the Bay Area to come to Europe.
Yeah.
Lately for a new outlook.
Yeah. Well, again, right. I've hit the point in my career where I want to take the skills and experiences that I have and try and help ecosystems outside of the Bay Area. But I want to turn your question around a little bit and hopefully teach a little something about what experienced entrepreneurs know about fundraising. When a VC goes and raises capital, they make certain promises to their investors about the kind of sectors they're going to invest in, the geographies they're going to invest in, the stages that they're going to invest at, the size of checks that they're going to write. And it's incumbent on you as entrepreneurs who are trying to raise to qualify everyone you talk to. So I have one investor who's going to do early stage investments, but the promises he's making is Southern and Eastern Europe, only entrepreneurs coming from 10 top research labs. So you here in Scotland may have the best thing in the world, and he may look like he's the right kind of investor for you. But since he made a promise to his investors about where he's going to invest, what you're doing doesn't matter to him. And he may listen to you, but he's going to be wasting your time. So I want you to think very hard about the person who you're pitching your equity to, not your product, your equity to, and whether they are a fit for you. There's opportunity all over the world. There are some investors that invest all over the world, but you need to qualify who you're talking to.
Yeah, great. Marvin, you are based in Bay Area, but you travel everywhere. I follow you on social media. What are you seeing as hotspots that maybe people are not always looking at?
So, like I said, because of my involvement in the different funds and my own sort of like fund. So my own fund, I specifically look in Europe. The thesis is anywhere in Europe, founders who want to come to the US. But so I'll just give you an idea, sort of this idea, sort of like local, sort of like global maximum versus local maximum. My partner Carlos and I looked at our portfolio at that time was 39 companies. We're at like 43 right now. And so at that time we looked at the portfolio and we're like, okay, which ones are doing well? Which ones are not doing well? why are they doing well? And what we actually found is that even though they're all from all over Europe, so we've done investments, France, UK, Slovakia, Georgia, the country, Ukraine, Germany, Portugal, so just all over. What we found that was universal was that the founders actually ended up moving to the US. The ones who actually stayed back home, cost structure is lower, they just don't grow as quickly. And I think the reason about that is because they don't really understand truly the competitive landscape. And I also think you learn a lot of stuff where it's like, yes, just because the founders over there, and Turkey too. We had a company just invested in recently, Turkey, but they kept their engineering team back home. But if you as a founder are not sort of like in the flow of things and understanding sort of like what that level of competition is, you're toast. And you just won't grow as quickly. So there's this great saying in Silicon Valley, it's like you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Like I have a very love-hate relationship with San Francisco, like just really love-hate relation. But I want to say I'll be there for the rest of my life and for the rest of my career because of just being close to a lot of other great investors, being close to sort of like really, really smart founders. It just raises your game. And so that's actually really, really important.
I've heard this kind of talk. Oh, it's in my face. I've heard this kind of talk for years, for over a decade, of Silicon Valley people coming to Asia and saying you need to go to San Francisco, right? And I spent enough time there this year, and I have to say it's definitely a hotspot. In terms of right now with AI, if you're developing an AI startup, it's like you have to be there because I feel like the network is growing. The people are all coming in from around the world there. It's not just Americans that are there. Everyone's coming in there. And so that network effect, it's like being at the beginning of .com or being in the beginning of social. It's just a very exciting time to be in the city. So it does sound like, you know, because I'm sure you read the news, it looks terrible there, right? You see videos and pictures of San Francisco, it looks really grim. But the tech underbelly is quite exciting, right?
I mean, the problem with the media, right? The media is actually a lagging factor. And so everyone was bagging on San Francisco in 2020, 2021, 2022. But so a lot of people left, a lot of very established folks left, but actually a lot of young founders actually moved there. And like the rents dropped like 30, 40%. Lots of young founders actually moved in 2020, 2021. So the whole, like, it's just a whole new generation.
It's the same thing in Hong Kong where I am as well, right? I'm sure everybody heard a lot of the political thing that happened, and then COVID happened. A lot of people left. I left, but a lot of people went back, and it's mostly the new generation coming in. So I feel like, yeah, whatever you read is like the original guard is leaving. There's all these new 21-year-old kids coming in. I was talking to Chris about some of his startups, super young kids. They're from a relatively smaller university in Vancouver, and then they are moving to San Francisco because they just got to be there. Yeah, exactly. And leave your team behind. They can live in their city, but the founders have to be where the competitors are and to be competing.
I mean, just so you know, there's about 40 events in generative AI every week.
Every San Francisco. Yeah, every night almost. Yeah.
I mean, unless you're a billionaire trying to protect, you know, the windfall IPO you just had, you probably should not care that they're all moving to Miami, because that's not necessarily where you should be as a founder who's hungry, who's trying to get something off the ground. I'm not saying everyone has to be in San Francisco or Silicon Valley, but you do have to be where the action is happening.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to Marvin again and start down the line. Okay, so I'm going to open this up to questions after this question, because hopefully this will encourage more questions. 2023, like everybody's talked about the market. How should founders approach you for a check today?
Well, I'm hoping that you've done your homework about the specific stage and spaces that I'm interested in. But actually, I know this is like very old school, but the reality is that I'm very reliant on introductions, whether through my founders particularly or other investors, because the reality is that I get pinged. Like if you look at all my social media, you look at my emails, there's just amount of just cold outreach that I get. I can't look through all of them. Yeah. And it's very hard to figure out. So I use this filter, and it's almost like a test, right? Can you get to me like in a smart way? Because if you can, that's a test. That means that you can use this to recruit. That means you can use this to get customers. That means you can use this to get other investors versus sort of, anyways, that's my test.
Yeah. So all of you here are already very smart because you're able to talk to Marvin face to face after this. Mike?
Well, I'm not writing checks generally now.
Yeah.
When I do as an angel check, it's the same thing. It's, has someone gotten to me in a smart way, and has someone learned how to approach an investor in a reasonable way, particularly for my time. If you've sent me, like I get them all the time on LinkedIn, 3 pages about your business, I'm basically going to hit delete because you haven't communicated to me in a way that I can digest what you're saying. So that would be the number one thing.
Great.
In our case, as a pre-seed investor, our goal is to see as close to 100% of what happens in Canada as possible. So I probably have the most open access of everyone up here. Personal introductions still matter because they get you to the front of the queue. So, the most effective way to get to me is going to be somebody who can vouch for you and say, hey, this is worth your time. But I have a blog, chrisneumann.com. There's a big button on there that says pitch me. You can literally press that button, upload your pitch deck. I will read it. I think last year we met something like 3,300 founders across Canada.
Wow.
But we do only invest in Canadian companies, so I don't know how relevant that's going to be here.
I'd just like to build on this point as well about being smart and hustling to try and get to the right person, because this is something that I see in certain founders that I had to do a huge amount of this, of like, how am I going to get in front of this person? How am I going to, if you look, I used to have a Google Doc that just had the ways that I would reach out to people, and it would sort of evolve over time based on what would work and what wouldn't work, and trying not to be too, trying not to give up. I think that was one of the things I learned very quickly. Sometimes you need to message somebody 3, 4, 5 times. I think to get into Deliveroo, it took us like 7 emails and ways in through different connections that we had, and just trying because we knew that they were the right customer for us. But we also knew that the CTO was extremely busy and wasn't going to respond to a message. And I think I say that quite a lot to the companies that I'm working with, is like, do not give up after 2 or 3. Don't be annoying, right? And make sure that your proposition and your value proposition about you and your business is really clear. And almost flipping, like, instead of thinking about a customer, thinking about what is it that I could use to effectively communicate to get to make this message to this founder, or to this investor. Because, like you say, if you get a pitch in a LinkedIn message from somebody you've never heard of when you're on the bus, you're just going to forget about it, right? So being smart about how you communicate, I think, is super. It's a really good signal for me.
Very much like Chris's website, the Cake Ventures website does have an option to email us cold. But if I look at my database of deals, most of the deals that I get have come from network. I also have some other deal flow mechanisms that, certainly bring in deals, but I would say most of the deals that get over the line are deals that come from within the VC network. Now, I think one of the questions is, how do you get an investor to answer a cold email if you have no other resources to get to them? And putting an even finer point on what Mike said, like 3 paragraphs of like all wall of text, I can't read that. Like, tell me what you're doing, who you are, some KPIs that tell me that you're doing well, and like a very short ask. Like, it can't be a huge long tome. And those emails often get answered, even if it's just, oh, I don't invest in this sector, but I appreciate the fact that you reached out and were concise. Like, that is a good answer too, right? But sometimes it's like, oh, this sounds interesting, let's meet. Yeah. So the quality of your cold email absolutely matters in whether it gets answered or not.
This is also great information for me, because I always sometimes wonder, it's a down market this year. Why are there more people coming to my conferences, my tech conferences, when it's down? They have money to get a booth. They have another. They're there actually to network and to meet the people that might be a warm intro to an investor, things like that. Even the investors are on stage are saying it's a down market. Don't look for money. Don't ask me for cash. But we're looking at what 2024, 2025 looks like. But definitely, it's a lot about meeting people and going that way. I think the COVID time also showed that doing a lot of meetings just on Zoom, at least get a voice and get an idea. Like, I heard this before, I heard that before. I think it's very important as well. And as well as having events like this, I think it's great that we're all back together again. I know that seems like a long time ago, but I still think it's very important for warm intros. Yeah, because you can just hear nobody wants these giant cold emails. Let's ask some questions to the audience. Which startups are here? Who's in a startup founder here? Okay, so you guys have tons of questions, right? So this guy right here, yep, you have to come up here though. You were raising your hand, right?
Okay. I'll go your side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. It's been a great session so far, learning a lot already. So I've been in the startup and I'm also interested in moving on to your side of the fence. But for now, I'm interested. So I know a lot about AI. I've been all over that. I noticed there were some criticisms and also some opportunities. I'd like people to talk about it a bit more, but even when you were talking, like you get a lot of, I appreciate like the personal nature of making those connections and getting extra value. But something that the new AI is built for is processing things at scale that, for example, all of your cold emails and your cold contacts, it can process all of that actually pretty well. And there'll be people in your network or you know, even myself who could build something which can actually do that for you. So you're not missing out on these cold opportunities, for example. So yeah, just I appreciate it might not be the best investments because at the moment they're higher rated, but to kind of to rubbish it off is something that I wouldn't agree with personally, but sure, like you're in the positions where you've got I'd like you to expand more on the emerging opportunities in AI and how that relates to your worlds.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the biggest opportunities is within existing portfolio companies who have identified a problem and a solution and now can use AI to accelerate what they were already using technology to do. I think a lot of the true winners of AI are going to be legacy companies like a Databricks, a Google, OpenAI, who were already around and who can now use AI to accelerate their core business. I think a lot of the newer companies are AI wrappers on something that doesn't necessarily need AI to exist and is not truly solving the problem of whatever customer they're trying to solve, right? It's AI for the sake of AI. Now, can that evolve? Will that evolve? I hope so, because I think the technology is good. But I think the most immediate winners are going to be the incumbents right now.
I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on AI, but I do think I personally am slightly more excited about AI versus other mega trends, particularly crypto and blockchain. You would hear people doing very unnecessary things on the blockchain because it was on the blockchain and therefore it was valuable. And I feel, to build on Monique's point, exactly the same. If the problem requires AI to be solved, and that is how you're solving the problem, but ultimately your customer doesn't care whether or not you're using AI. The customer cares whether or not they're making money, saving money, more effective, whatever it might be from a business outcome. And typically, if a company is leading with the fact that it's an AI business and not talking about the problem that it's solving, then that for me is a bit of a red flag. So, yeah. And I also think sometimes like you see businesses just sort of shoehorning AI into their pitch deck because investors like that. I mean, you're going to get through the door, but are you really going to build a successful product and solve a customer problem? Probably not, based on the fact that you're doing that. It'll be because you understand the problem. If AI is the best possible tool to solve a customer problem, then use AI. And if it's not, then do whatever else there's out there that's more effective and faster.
I'm going to continue and sort of highlight a bit about where AI is not going to work. And to continue on the thread here, I'm going to actually point to the example Nick just gave, which is trying to solve problems with AI without necessarily understanding the problem space. So what he just described makes total plausible sense. Hey, if we take AI, we can process all of these cold emails, and then you're never going to miss a cold opportunity. But in describing that, he missed the subtlety in what Mike and Monique were talking about in their evaluation of cold emails, which is if I get a 3-paragraph rambling email, that's a signal about the ability or inability of the founder to communicate. And so, in fact, AI going through and overly simplifying that loses some of the important information that investors are looking for, which is the ability to communicate, or in Marvin's case, the test of, can you find a way to get to me? And so we saw this with Web3. We see this anytime that there's a hype, there's this, oh, I'm going to solve this problem with AI. And that problem is rational. It makes sense. But unless you deeply understand the industry, unless you have founder market fit, you end up building a lot of stuff that the users don't actually want.
You're very good. I know why you write good blog posts. So look, as a fintech investor, I've looked at thousands of, I'm going to apply AI to fintech. And my marker for what was interesting was not anyone who said they create better algorithms. It was people who had proprietary data, because algorithms, right, we know it costs nothing now. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is applying sort of a more generalist and historic view, and what I think AI is going to do for startups, which is, if you look at Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, what was actually going on was compressing the capital required to get to product market fit, right? You all of a sudden had access to AWS and all these other tools that allowed you to find product market fit cheaply. And then it cost you a god awful fortune to compete with Google to hire engineers and salespeople. And so you had to raise, a crap ton of money that ended up diluting you as entrepreneurs. I think the move to AI, and I've seen this in some of my portfolio companies, compresses the cost of scaling, right? If you build AI in for your engineering and your customer support and your sales and all of this from day one, it means everyone you do hire is going to be 10x more effective. So you don't have to raise as much money, which means you're going to get to hold on to more of your company as you grow. So that's my thought about that.
Yeah, let's hear about the garbage.
No, so I want to clarify my sort of thoughts, where I am very, very bullish about AI in the long run, but what I see right now really dismays me, because it actually is very reflective of like what crypto was, right? Oh, look at these people raising a lot of money on crypto, so we're going to do crypto. And so sort of like the technology, not the problem. And so what excites me on the AI side, where it's like, look, I do think it's real. I've done like 3 AI investments, right? Okay. But they're ultimately very problems, so they start with the problem and then, oh, AI is a good solution for doing this. Why I like about AI is that ultimately, if you think about technology, it sounds really terrible, but if you think about technology, it eats people, right? It eats jobs. And so this is actually what it does. It's going to refactor big companies in general, where it's like, wow, instead of having 500 people, we're going to use like 300 people, right? For startups now, like I genuinely think with all the tools and things that are actually being released now, like in the next, like, I'm going to say probably, there's a blog post I'm doing as well too on this. That's probably the next like 2-3 months I'm putting out, but it's the sort of 3-person, $1 billion company, where with all the tools and software tools that are available, you're going to be able to start from scratch, with the capability of actually companies that used to be like 50 to 100 people. Yeah. And so for example, like I invested in a company that's very, very close to the folks over at, at Y Combinator, and Paul Graham said, so it was a private conversation, but what he said is that ChatGPT killed probably about like 900 companies in their portfolio, right? Because just like destroyed, where it's like, wow, we raised like $10 million and have 150 people, and we're like, wow, ChatGPT just like wrecked us. Right. And so you're going to see a lot more of that. And so I am bullish in the long run. In the short run, it's just a bubble where there's just so much noise, and you dig in, you're like, yeah, you don't really have no understanding what AI is. You're not really solving a real problem. That's like 99% of the companies.
Yeah. Before Mike and Chris get back.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, because you just said that Web 1, Web 2, we're getting the tools to make it cheaper and cheaper to get to product market fit. Now you can have a company. What's the next raise? Are people gonna have to raise more money to hire better engineers to continue building the AI, or is it just they're just gonna loop in through the AI companies that are being produced now?
Unless you are a AI company, you're a moron to hire your own AI engineers. In my own view.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, like, I'll give you an example of a company that I've got where they went through their entire business as it is. They're doing, I don't know, about 5 million a year right now, but they went through their entire business and they applied AI to every single thing that they do. And now they'd be able to scale to 50 million with hiring 10% of the amount of people that they needed before they went through this exercise. So kind of what I would say for folks that are getting ready to raise is, if you haven't yet figured out how to apply these tools, which are cheap and freely available, to what you do every day, you are no longer competitive relative to anyone else.
Great point.
Yeah, one thing I'll just add, Mike made a really interesting comment about Web 1 to Web 2 being about reducing the cost of going to product market fit. There's a book that came out about 2 months ago called Prediction Machines by a couple of professors at the University of Toronto and MIT. And they talked about AI not as artificial intelligence, which is sort of personifying it, but actually as reducing the cost of prediction or statistics. And if you read this, it's an economic viewpoint, or an economist viewpoint, I'm sorry, of the opportunities being created by this technology and what's likely to happen. And it's less about, okay, there's this AI that's magically going to smartly do things, but it's more talking about the fact that, for example, the reason why autonomous vehicles, why we're in striking distance of that, is because we've massively decreased the ability of machines to make predictions about, okay, what will happen if I go this direction? What will happen if I go that direction? So I'd highly recommend this, Prediction Machines. The main author is Ajay Agarwal from Rotman School of Business at the University of Toronto.
Great. Well, that was a great answer to that question. Who wants to ask the next question? This guy? Okay, come on up here. Oh, yeah, right. Sorry. Good point. Yeah, you can use this mic here and face the video.
Hello, I'm in hardware robotics. You see recently a video of Boston Dynamic progress from 1990s to now. Everybody's amazed about it, but they got money, funding, DARPA funding, public funding for a while. It's really hard to get funded hardware right now from VCs. How would you? What would be an advice for hardware company making robots to please VCs, to help them, to help us raise better money, capital?
So maybe I'll start. We are an investor in a company called Sanctuary AI, which does really interesting robotics of the type that he mentioned. If we saw that company today, we would not invest in them, because in our earlier fund, we did hardware. And in our newest fund, as Mike alluded to earlier, we made a promise to our investors that we were only going to do software. And so I would say the number one thing you can do is doing your research in the funds and understanding, do you invest in hardware? And it's not, we easily get into these, oh, VCs don't take risks, da, 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 da. But at the basis, if they've told their investors they will not invest in hardware, there's nothing you can do to change that. So inverting that, figuring out who are the investors that do invest in hardware and what you need to achieve to get them excited is probably the best use of your time, I would say.
Yep.
I think pitching the majority of VC funds that are software, mostly software, a hardware company is a waste of time. If you are pitching a VC fund, it needs to be a hardware specific VC fund in order to make it worth your time to pitch them. Boston Dynamics took how long to get to where they are now? How long? 30 years? Right. I have a 10-year plus two-year extension fund that I need to return. I'm not going to take 30 years to return my investors' capital. I just can't. And so that is why a lot of hardware is, funded by government. And so I think that's a more, not a more interesting, but a better path to actually getting some money into your company alongside actual hardware VCs than trying to go after VCs who are like generalists, or we do software, or we do XYZ that is not specifically hardware.
Maybe add AI hardware to the deck. Get you in a few more doors.
Don't. That's a joke. Don't do that. Don't do that.
That's a joke. That is a joke.
So just, practically speaking, I think it's usually grants. What I've seen for hardware companies, usually grants, as well as corporate VCs. I'm not a fan of most corporate VCs, but some corporate VCs actually specifically look for this stuff, because for them, it's not necessarily just returns, it's actually strategic. And so there are quite a lot of them, whether it's like the Asian corporate VCs, a lot of Japanese, a lot of Korean, even Taiwanese as well too. They do a lot of hardware because it's actually, sort of an addition to sort of like some of the stuff that they're doing. You have to be careful because a lot of them, there's a lot of changeover in corporate VCs, so they're not always as stable. And the other thing too is particularly with Samsung, you have to be very, very careful because they steal IP. But in general, the Japanese ones tend to be pretty good about this stuff, and some of the Taiwanese ones, not all of them, but like some of them. And some of the US ones are usually pretty good about this stuff.
I think the one other comment I would make is, and this builds off of how Monique described her return horizon. The question is, how are you, knowing that you're following this path that ultimately ends up in manufacturing stuff, right? How can you take the maximum number of risks off the table for the smallest amount of money before you get to the point where someone says, okay, I am engineered to give you $100 million so you can build your manufacturing plant. You've already proven that people want your stuff. You've already proven that you can have the design capabilities. You've proven all these things that don't actually require you to invest in hardware. It's your processes, your software, your all of these things. And that will put you in a position where you look better than 95% of the hardware startups out there. You've taken all the risks you can off the table, even some that no one thought you could take off the table. That makes you more suited for an early stage fund, which then puts you in a position where they actually know all the people who will write the checks to build your plant.
Yeah.
I guess one other thing I would add is, often when you're building something super early, you can be like just desperate to speak to anybody that sounds like they might be the right customer or they might be the right investor. And as you have more and more of those conversations, you start to realize how to be more effective in having those conversations and where to not spend your time, which I think is something that when the only thing you can't buy more of is time, particularly when you're on your own at the very beginning of a startup. So you might be having investor conversations with VCs, but they're not VCs that invest in hardware. And then you're going to get yourself into like, oh, this is super hard. Whereas I would just try and ask yourself how you can be slightly more effective with your time. And it's okay to not talk to the right sort of customers. And I think once you start getting those signals, either from customers or potential investors, you'll just get better at, what was it that I said to this particular fund that got us a meeting? Or actually, I'm not going to take that call with this VC because I can't see that they're going to take a hardware investment. And yeah, because you have to be super good with your time.
Yeah. I want to add something to that. You will feel empowered when you learn to ask a potential investor, so do you do early stage hardware? No? Okay, I'm not talking to you. Right? Truly get that swagger, and what investors are going to see is this entrepreneur knows how to manage their time and their resources. So it'll be hard because you always think you're, as an entrepreneur that you're in this supplicant position. But when you learn to, the very first question is, what's the most important question to ask this investor? In your case, do you do early stage hardware? No? Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily leave it on a okay you notes. I would follow that up with, okay, do you have people in your network that do invest in early stage hardware? And would you be willing to introduce me to those people?
Yeah, that's a good answer. Yeah, that's a much nicer version. And also, I find that talking to like a lot of early stage startups go looking for investment money, don't actually know how venture capital works. So I think Monique put it in a very good perspective. Like people need to make their money back. They have investors into their fund. So there goes up a big line of people. It's not that just the rich people walking around the checkbook going, passing it out, right? Especially those big name brand VCs. But also the other thing I've also noticed is that nobody wants to say, I think, thank you to anybody because it's a very small knit group, right? Eventually, Marvin may pass on it, but if you gave him a good impression, then maybe Chris will ask him. There'll be something there, right? They'll be like, "Oh yeah, he was nice to me. He didn't say, he didn't tell me to fuck up." But I know that's just more aggressive. But it's just like keeping friendly, and investors also want to keep their fingers on all the founders because they never know what might happen next.
If I can add one thing, and this is actually a really important point. When you're meeting with investors, either talking to them or sending them emails or whatever, if you think about communicating in a way that they could and would pass it on to somebody else, that's incredibly effective. It is very common for pitch decks, for example, to be shared around, right? And founders who've gone through fundraising and had sort of competitive environments suddenly realize that investors were reaching out to them. It's because what'll often happen is I'll get a deck, I'll look at it, go, oh, this is really interesting. And then I'll pass it to one of my friends, or this isn't a fit for me. Right. So, for example, there's a company in aging tech met with a founder last week, right? And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And the cab in Lisbon with Monique was like, hey, what do you think of this? We should do this together. Let's talk to the founder. And so that happens quite regularly. So even when you're talking to somebody and they say, no, I'm not a hardware investor, if you're able to describe what you do in 1 or 2 sentences effectively so that it hits their mind and they can explain accurately to somebody else and look good doing so, then that can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. And just a practical tool around this sort of stuff, it's like write a sort of copy paste thing that you could say, I've used this to get intros to get in front of people, is to say, if you have a network that can potentially introduce you, then make it easy for that person to make the intro. So like write them the email that says, this is the company, this is what they do, this is the problem they're solving, this is who the founders are, this is the traction that they're seeing. So that you don't, because if you're just asking for an intro, you're then leaving it in the hands of that individual to say, oh, I'm going to concisely describe this business. The chances of them making that as good as something that you can evolve over time. Yeah. And busy people aren't going to be able to do that. But if you give them, I literally have a Google Doc, which is like an intro email template that I'll send to people and say, hey, could you, if you're able to introduce us, could you use this? And then it just makes someone that could take 10, 15 minutes, take 2 minutes, and more likely to happen.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of people practice pitches. That's like the main thing. Like they have the deck up here. They got 3 minutes. They're trying to win a competition or make an impression on VC. But I think to follow up on Chris said, I think it's important. What is the next conversation look like? And then there's no practice for that. You just have to keep doing it. But I think that's something that maybe in office hours, we should, you practice those kind of, role playing, because I think that's very important, because it's true. How can you seed the inception into Chris's mind where he's going to listen to it and maybe think about it later on? Any other questions? Okay, this guy in the green shirt, come up here, please.
Woman in green shirt.
Oh, there's a woman in the green shirt. There's 2 green shirts.
No, that's online. That's our online questions.
Oh, online question. Okay, sorry, gentleman in the green shirt. We're gonna green shirt on the line first. You can just read it.
All right. I've got a couple of questions from our online audience. The first one is, what's your take on the ecosystem in Scotland, the UK, and are you open to potentially investing in early stage companies in Scotland? Thank you.
I guess I'll start trying to give a positive perspective. I think, I came up through the Scottish tech ecosystem when people were literally smashing down asbestos-filled walls to build a tech community. And I think we have a really friendly, approachable bunch of folks here. We've had some huge success stories, particularly Skyscanner being a big example of that. And my experience was I was super young, just super eager to learn, and I could go out and meet people who'd had experience doing all kinds of stuff. So I went to every meetup. I organized meetups. I just read everything that people would recommend, but I could come here and sit in the cafe and speak to people who had dealt with problems that I had. So I think, having spent time in other cities, I think Edinburgh has a smaller ecosystem, but it's got really good people and really people who are willing and able to give you time. I think TechScaler massively adds to that by making making really experienced people available for a bit more focused time. So I think it has its opportunities. I think it also has its downsides. I think we hold ourselves back too much. I think we focus too much on some of the SEIS stuff, which can hold companies back. It can be really hard to know the right investors. We have a lot of issues as well, but I do think we have, particularly with TechScaler, we have an opportunity to do something pretty exciting.
So I've been coming here probably 6 or 7 years now and doing a lot of work with the folks at Codebase. And my perspective here is that the Scottish ecosystem punches well above its weight. This is a very strong ecosystem, strong founders, great engineering talent. One of the things that Codebase and TechScaler is really trying to solve for is, by virtue of the size of the ecosystem, there's not a lot of examples of people who know what great looks like, right? And so for as long as I've been coming to Scotland, people have been saying, well, yeah, Skyscanner and FanDuel. Okay, cool. That's like 10 years ago now, right? If you think about how hard it is to have a massive success, right? For most of you, the industry you're in, there's not $1 billion company that's ever been founded in Scotland. And so it's incumbent on you to go figure out, how can I go meet people who know, if I really want to be aggressive, what I should do. I think a good example of that were actually the founders of Snap40 Current Health, who, they were acquired last year. They were building a health tech company, and there weren't any examples here. So they were getting on planes and they were going to various cities in the United States and elsewhere in Europe to figure out, what does it mean to build a health tech? And so I would just tie it back to our earlier conversation and say there's a lot of amazing entrepreneurs and raw material here, but it is incumbent on you to figure out where to get advice beyond the local ecosystem.
I just got here like 2 days ago, so I don't know enough about this ecosystem. I am open to investing, but just understand I'm not judging you by the local. I'm judging you. The bar is how do you compare against sort of like my top 10 percentile in my portfolio, which is a global portfolio, right? So yeah, so that I am open. I like, generally speaking, I like foreign founders. Most of my success stories have been immigrant founders, either immigrant founders in the US, which is no surprise, or actually founders from elsewhere moving to the US, right? So some of my winners in the past, like Shippo, German founder, Eric Hall, French founder, Rapid API, Israeli founder. So like I've had great success. Printify, Latvian founder. And so I specifically look for that model, but that's a very high bar.
Okay, another question from online.
Another question from online. Back onto AI. I think Chris mentioned using AI in the manufacturing sector, but there are other traditional sectors requiring digitization, such as legal, tourism, disaster rescue, etc. Who's investing in digitizing these sectors, and where are these investors based?
So sure, for it is, we invest in that. I think the question that we always ask is, in sectors that have been reticent to digitize, why is AI suddenly going to change the adoption, right? In many cases, the answer is it won't. In some cases, it's, we can actually do something that we couldn't do before. But there has to be a reason why this is suddenly different than the hundreds and hundreds of companies that were trying to break into this industry over the last, 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who is doing it. I think a lot of generalist funds are probably looking at AI for legal, AI for ed tech, AI for whatever. So it's certainly happening.
I think having built a business where we tried to just go, everyone wants to build software well, we could apply all these processes and technologies across legal, because that's super far behind, and everyone wants to build GitHub for lawyers for years and years and years because it's such an inefficient whatever. I think you have to go in and really understand the industry to find somewhere and an organization that's willing to work with you, and because I think again, if you're leading with the technology and saying this is an inefficient industry, you're not understanding why they're saying no. If you can understand why they're saying no, and then you can still have an opportunity, that's very different. I think it's having spent a lot of time trying to sell to the wrong people, listening when you're not seeing the signals that you want to see. And when you're trying to educate somebody when you're selling to them, that's generally not a great signal that you're going to be able to sell.
Just about the AI piece, right? And so, for example, like let's use construction as an industry, huge industry, right? And you're like, why has there been no technology penetration? See, marketplaces, SaaS was like, we're going to bring in sort of like transparency and help you sort of like manage the cost structure. And like, actually, the incentive structure actually works against that. They want it to be super opaque because everyone's taking money out the top, right? Why do you think the construction industry is the most corrupt industry on the planet anywhere, right? So they don't want it to be transparent, right? So the incentives are not there. So this is why there has not been deep penetration technology. And so this is just something to keep in mind of just why now, what's changed in the industry. Like these are the things that as an investor, I want to understand. And I have some idea of it, but I'm usually educated by listening and talking to the founders who are deep in it.
Yeah, great. Okay, gentlemen in the green shirt, come on back down. Yeah, sure.
Hi. So I'm a clean tech founder, hardware business. So you guys.
That's it. Okay, good. All right, well done. Well done.
So it's we're putting together a round. We've got a corporate VC and a number of other investors kind of lined up. We're at kind of advanced stage in negotiation with some of those parties. And we're looking to bring in a VC into the mix to lead the round and do the due diligence and so on. And just at the beginning of that process, so we're just starting to open up a number of conversations. We've got a few targets lined up. We know who we want to talk to. But I'm worried about that process, that it's going to lead to a set of conditions that we're going to have preference shares built in there. We're going to have ratchets and all kinds of founder unfriendly terms. I just wondered, how can a founder, given that you guys aren't in the hardware space, this is a really nice opportunity to ask kind of independent, neutral people, how can a founder position themselves to do well and have founder friendly terms into their term sheet?
We just heard the story about FanDuel, how they didn't have that, right?
Right. Okay.
Right. So yeah, let me start with Marvin or Mike.
First, really important to remember that the world has changed and that VCs don't have to compete on founder-friendly terms. So the best you could do is figure out what the competitive environment is, right? There will be ratchets, there will be preference shares, there will be all these things, because frankly, if a VC doesn't take those, their LPs will slap the crap out of them, right? Because it's what's available in the market. The next thing is you have to, your biggest tool, your most important tool is how you bring the round together. If you don't create a competitive environment, if you don't manage the process of raising capital as if it's your number one, number two, number three, number four job, right, for that period of time, and engineer the process, then you're going to end up with worse terms, because the best way to get the terms you want is have someone else who's competing for the deal, right? That's it. And then the final thing is make progress on the business such that financial VCs, right? Because you've got all these other people around the table and actually they're useless, because the one thing you need right now is a lead. So until you have a lead, you actually have nothing.
Yeah, you basically have no leverage. And one of the things that you do is you get, so how big of a round you're trying to do? Do you mind me asking? Yeah. So one of the things that, yeah. So in general, like for this is what I call like a seed round, right? And obviously every company has sort of different circumstances, but for seed round in general, the way that you get leverage, there's two ways to get leverage. Number one, you have money in the bank already. So whether that's from customers or get money from angels, right? Because I hate that whole thing about sort of, I need a lead. That usually doesn't happen until you're doing a full equity round. It usually doesn't happen until Series A. And so I don't know the ecosystem, but in general, for a lot of other markets, when they go talk to VCs, most of my companies have already raised somewhere between 500 to 700,000 from angels already. That's your leverage to say fuck you, right? The other thing, and then what happens is the lead comes in and then the whole round actually gets converted typically. And so you usually don't need a lead, to be frank. And then the second thing I would say is that at the end of the day, your leverage is to be able to walk away. So whoever side actually is willing to walk away, they have the power. And so you need to put yourself in that power where it's like you either have money in the bank from customers or money in the bank from angel investors and other folks, and then use as a driving force with the competitive process to get that done. Does that make sense?
I'll put a couple exclamation marks on these points and say, at pre-seed, where we normally see really bad terms is where you had one option, right? So you didn't manage the process well. You didn't talk to enough investors. So in like Silicon Valley, to raise $1.5 million, you are typically talking to 100 to 150 people, right? Oftentimes here, like in Scotland, there's probably 5 VCs, right? Like, there's just not the numbers there. So you've got to figure out, how am I going to increase the top of funnel to give me options? And how am I going to figure out the intersection of this particular stage, folks who are interested in what I do, folks who are interested in my geography? I'll give you a name, memorize this and reach out to me about it afterwards. There's a fund called Active Impact based in Canada that does pre-seed hardware, clean tech investing globally. And the founder lives 2 blocks from me. But you've got to do that research, and you can do that by looking backwards and saying, okay, let me find other companies like mine, look on Crunchbase, figure out who they raised from. And I don't mean your competitors, I mean just hardware, clean tech, et cetera, et cetera.
No, I don't have anything else to say other than get multiple term sheets. I think for a lot of founders raising their first round capital, you find yourself in a position where you're just like, okay, this firm put down a term sheet, I should absolutely take it, or I shouldn't shop it around, or they tell you not to shop it around. You want to get multiples in tandem so that you have choices, right? And so don't try to go for like one term sheet. Don't try to go for two, try to get 5. Right. So then you have, sure, they're going to have preferences and they might have a ratchet, but somewhere in that mix, somewhere in the rubble, you're going to find the term sheet that actually makes sense.
Can I add? I want you to understand the mechanics of what Monique just said and how that dovetails with running a good process. So when you sign a term sheet that has a no shop, you have a legally binding contract, right? So you need to have done the work to have 5 VCs who you call when one VC says, I'm going to send you a term sheet. And then you're immediately getting on the phone, like on the phone, not sending an email and saying one of our other, VCs that we're talking to is sending us a term sheet. Do you want to send us one? And that happens like in 4 hours. So if you haven't done all the work to line that up, you're at a disadvantage, right? But it is that quick, that intensive, that personal, right? Great. So
one other thing I'd add as well is sometimes when I'm, particularly from a mentoring perspective, working with founders, I see them not prioritizing the just relationship building around, like, even if you're not ready to speak to a business or it's the right time to get involved, planting seeds is super important, so that keeping people up to date with what you're doing, building your network, prioritizing networking. And I think it was, people sort of forgot that a bit during COVID because we were stuck inside for a long time. But one thing that I was talking about a while ago was how early we started planting seeds for Deliveroo to acquire us, right? Like years before it happened. And there's a saying that I was talking to another entrepreneur about, and he said, when's the best time to plant a seed? 15 years ago, right? Because by the time it becomes something valuable, it's in a different perspective. So I think, yeah, going out and making sure that you're getting yourself out of your comfort zone and you're prioritizing building those relationships. It's hard, right? But you've got to do the work.
Yeah, great. Putting that in perspective with the Fringe, right? We saw a show the other day. We didn't think it was very good, but we're thinking they planted a seed that they may be on Saturday Night Live one day, right? So we thought that was interesting. That if you want to put it into local things. Thanks, Paul. Great question. Last question right here. Holly, come on up.
So context, I am what I call myself a part-time founder. So I still work full-time somewhere. So the question is, would you ever invest in a part-time founder? If not, I kind of want to get into specifics on like your take on it. Basically, how do you weigh the pros and cons before you're willing to invest in a part-time founder?
No, I would not invest in a part-time founder, but you should not be calling yourself a part-time founder. You're just a founder. Okay. You may have something else that is paying the bills right now, but you're a founder and you're building a company that eventually you want to have investors invest in. And when that happens, then you will be the full-time founder of the thing you are working on. But there's no reason to call yourself a part-time founder. Like, what benefit does that give you of calling yourself part-time?
Yeah.
No, you're just a founder. Yeah, you're just a founder.
So I'll give a specific example, which was the company that Casey alluded to, which was 3 founders. They were a year out of university. They were all working at companies, and they had built a prototype. They built an MVP. They had metrics. And the conversation was not about their job, right? They were pitching themselves as regular founders. But when it got to a certain point, they would say, hey, we need to raise this capital in order for us to quit our jobs and do this, right? And that's completely okay to do. I think the question will come up, why are you part-time, right? And if you are, 45 in a high 6-figure, role, and you're part-time because you don't want to give up that big fat salary, that's a problem. If you're younger or you have family obligations or like reasonable, like I need money to pay the bills, that is totally okay. Some number of investors kind of do this bullshit. Well, if you're not going to go full time, you must not want it enough. Those people are generally single dudes who like don't have like life experience and, entered a fund with a large paycheck. But as Monique said, pitch yourself as a founder, and then at the right time, it's okay to say, I can't go full time unless I, have this money, and that's totally fine.
I mean, I'm going to counter that view. So I'm one of those folks. If you aren't full time, I'm like, why would I put my money behind it, right? And so just to understand, like, you know, I don't want to be unreasonable, but I'll give you an example. I have a company I'm investing called Inbroker. He was at a partner at a private equity firm, and he was like, I'm quitting my $1 million job to basically go all in into this thing called Inbroker. It's now one of the best fintech insurance tech companies actually in the US right now. And so for me, it's actually is a signal commitment. Like, yes, I understand sort of like, you know, but it's a signal commitment, right? Like, how all in are you? And so just to say this, like, yes, it's a VC panel and stuff. I think most companies shouldn't raise money from VCs or shouldn't raise money, period. You know, the reality is that less than 3% of companies that get started raise VC money. And so does that mean 97% of the companies out there are not going to be good companies? That's actually just not true. It's really a scale thing, right? So just understand my incentives. Every company I invest in, I'm targeting 100 to like 500x of my money, right? Because the loss rates are so high. And I'm looking for multi-billion-dollar exits. And so just understand that I have many entrepreneur friends who've never raised any VC money. They've probably made way more money than some VC sort of funded startup founders. And so I do think it's the size of the business you want to sort of like build. I think it's a lifestyle that you want. There's nothing wrong with doing a side hustle. I think every employee should have a side business, should have multiple income streams. But that just basically means that VC may not be the best vehicle for what you're doing, and that's fine. Right? Like VC money is rocket fuel. You're not building a rocket. Why, you know, like, so I meet lots of founders. I'm like, what are you doing? It's like, awesome. But like, this isn't a fit for me. Like the biggest size of market and sort of, this is ultimately, and I'm usually sometimes wrong about this, but it's like, this is maximum going to be like a 20 to 50 million a year business. That's awesome. Right? So you're just pocketing off it. Don't raise money. Right? And so I'll give you an example. Both horrible human beings, but, you know, Ariane Huffington Post raised like $40-50 million, selling for $300 million. Mike Arrington, awful human being, started TechCrunch, bootstrap, sold for $30 million. He took home more money. He ended up getting way more money at the end of it. Yeah, awful human being. But the point is, bootstrap is not necessarily bad. And so it's okay to be a quote unquote part-time founder. Everyone should be a part-time founder, frankly, in this day and age.
Great. Do you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
Nothing to add. They said it right.
Okay. You can be a part-time lover, but not a part-time founder. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to this amazing VC panel. Thank you for coming out.
Oh, hi, folks. I just want to say, again, thank you for coming and thank you to an awesome panel. Please stay around and avail yourself for some lunch at the back there and continue the conversation. The guys are back again tomorrow here in Edinburgh for some office hours. I believe there's 1 or 2 slots available. If you want to book in a private one-to-one chat with them, then please do at techscaler.co.uk or thisiscodebase.com. Okay, the second one, sorry. And yeah, thanks for coming and apologies to those at home. You'll have to make your own lunch. Thank you.